Okay, well, thanks, Jim, and hello, everyone. What I do have is experience with this particular part of our system, and we basically did a big project last year where our client already had a lot of analytics and script, third-party tracking scripts implemented in their old website. So we had to find a solution pretty quickly on how to migrate all of that functionality across so that they don't lose their online marketing benefits. So um, did some research, and I'll start by explaining what I mean by the title of today's presentation. Is the practical application of Google Analytics and other third-party tracking scripts in your Angular single-page application. What I needed to do was find a practical solution to implement analytics and other scripts. So I'm going to try and cover some deeper details, but I'm really just going to show you and point you in the right direction to tools that will help you to achieve that. I didn't code everything myself. I don't have a GitHub with this entire solution up there that you can download, but I have references in my presentations and in a little test site where you can find all the different pieces that you'll need. The challenge with a single page application as compared to a normal HTML website where you have various pages is you need to find a way to trigger tracking events on route changes or view changes or whatever you need to do. So did some research about how to do that, and yes, you can probably go and stick in some Google Analytics functions in each of your controllers and mess up your entire application with duplicates of all of that. So I found a very clever guy out there. I'm going to quickly cover the library called Angularytics. It's out there on GitHub, and I will give you the links to it. And it's a guy that likes to be called Mgonto. He's got a few repositories out there and a few useful things. But I just basically found his Angularytics library, and it really did what I needed it to do, except for e-commerce tracking. So I had to do some customizations or modifications to the library to allow me to track all the e-commerce parts of what Google Analytics gives you. And then after the Google part, I'll cover quickly how we achieve the other third-party tracking scripts that aren't in Google Analytics, but you know the guys like Floodlights, Double Clicks, Google Tag Manager, Bright Tag, those kind of guys that like to render themselves within your page without you having much control of what they're injecting into your JavaScript. So we found a way to control those. And then I'd like to show you guys some of the results as it happens within the browser and in Google Analytics. Introduction to Angularytics, that's what he called it, is, as I said, is on GitHub. So that's why Mgonto here has a few things that are quite useful, but I'll just stick to what I know, and that's his Angularytics library. So all the instructions that you might need to get it into your application is right here. It was really simple for somebody like me that's not a full-on developer and a front-end scripter to implement, so I found that great. And I'll skip all of this, but again, I'll provide you the links to it. But to quickly talk about what it does, in your application, in your main app.js, you're going to do what I believe is called dependency injection of the library, and you're going to set it up and configure it in your main Angular application, so that each time your app loads up, it does the configuration here, and it calls itself a Google provider here, and then at runtime it's gonna execute the Angularytics, or it's gonna initialize itself, so that you don't have to do this each time in each one of your controllers. So this is really where what made me want to use this, because I realized how it's doing it. It's initializing itself, and it's making a bunch of services, and it actually has a various things you can use it. So mainly services are the ones we use, or just functions you can call from anywhere in your controllers that gives you access to the Google Analytics functions. One important thing before you go in and implement all of this, you need to make sure that the Google Analytics account that you're actually going to use on the web application is configured for e-commerce purposes, and that's the focus of my thing was to get e-commerce tracking working. So if you go into your administration functions on the Google Analytics portal, under your view you'll see there's an e-commerce settings section there, and you have to actually enable e-commerce. It's not enabled by default, and you will send data as much as you like, and it will just not go anywhere. It won't be recorded. So there are some other enhanced settings you can enable for additional custom parameters and those kind of things. But with the standard e-commerce tracking that Google gives you, they have a pretty straightforward list of variables that they record by default, and these advanced functions gives you the ability to set up more of those if you may need more. So just remember to do that, and then you need to obviously include the Java script that Google gives you. If you go to your tracking info here, this tracking code that you usually just copy and paste into your HTML. You need to make a version of this available in your application. Now, Google has just gone full on to the universal tag, and Angularytics supports that now. They've done some updates about 2 months ago, so the library does support the universal tags. My implementation doesn't use the universal tags just yet, but I looked at it's just basically a few functions and the way that you call it, and the syntax that changes. So it's pretty easy to convert that, and I'm going to be having to do that for a client now recently, so maybe in the future I'll post a link to something that has the updated universal version of it. But in any case, so you have the Google script that's given to you, given to anyone that opens an account, and then what I did is I just basically added a Google Analytics JavaScript file to my application, and of course when I did created my bundles, I just made sure that I have it included here with everything else that I compile and group together into my application. So once I've done this, I now have my account number in here, and you can limit it to a specific domain if you want to. I mean, this is just basic Google Analytics configuration values. I didn't do anything fancy here. I just removed the script tags around it basically, and this would be your standard Google Analytics script tag, not the universal one though. Now once you've done that, then you can obviously go and configure your app fully. Now I briefly pointed you at the app.js already. There's the configuration, there's the dependency injection at the top here. You need to initialize it or let it initialize itself each time on runtime. So basically once you've done that, just those few steps, including their library, your own Google account, and putting it in the app.js, you now have basic page tracking done. It literally on each route change event, it's going to automatically do a page track to Google. And to show you that, I use a little tool that Google provides as well. It's called the GA Debug add-on for Chrome, and I think it's available for Firefox too. It's really helpful because it's basically an addition to the console output in your developer tool that shows you everything that's going back and forth between you and the Google Analytics servers, and it really has helped me a lot in finding some issues. So what you see here is the Google or the Angularytics in its basic format doing its job. So what this debug tool helps you do is see what it's doing. So it's setting the account. This is the one I configured there. It's setting the arguments, which is the page, and my page value is just / because that's the home page of my single page application. And then it actually does a push to the Google object, a track page view request. And this is what's very helpful, is this tracking beacon sent with the exclamation mark with all the goods here below it. It's important you actually see that, because if you don't see that, it means it's not getting to Google. The reason could be you've got it locked down to a domain. The account's been incorrectly configured to reject certain kinds of traffic or something like that. So if you don't actually see this coming through in the console after enabling your Google Analytics debugger, you know something's wrong. And as you can see here, it's got the basic parameters here, just page, and this is really what it's sending. So with this being implemented as well, you now have active live stats on current visitors on your site as well. So I've got this little website, burger.azurewebsites.net. It's just a template that I created really quickly with this template that comes with Visual Studio or is available in Visual Studio. And if you go to this website, we should be able to see the visitor count increase. So I don't know if any of you have access to internet right now, but it takes a few seconds to pick up the visitors. In our busy sites, it's pretty impressive to watch that during the day. Maybe it's just me, but I enjoy seeing it climb, and it's pretty quick. So immediately you've got basic tracking enabled. It shows you the locations and whoever, where the IPs are coming from and all that kind of stuff is in real time. It's there. So that's Angularytics on its own, gives you all of that. It takes a while sometimes to refresh, but you'll see it'll catch up if there are, unless nobody's participating. It might also be that some of us are coming from the same IP. I believe this is proof enough that at least it works. And if you see, if I click around my site, some of my other pages, my content references or my contact information, you'll see that my console is now filled up with a lot of events. So there's my page arguments now changing. So as you can see, the different pages are being sent successfully to Google Analytics. The e-commerce customizations, basically just I needed to expand on the Angularytics library, so I went and added a few functions in exactly the same format as they had it in. So opened their library. I should have probably renamed it or something to not confuse people, but this is the same thing. And all I did is went through looking at how they are doing their event tracking, their page tracking, and just repeated those functions to track my order, item, and also I had learned somewhere like far down the line that you actually need to add a function as well to do the push for the transaction, because you can capture all this information of order information, item information, but if you don't actually do that subsequent push transaction function that's specific to the e-commerce, it's not the same as pushing a page view or anything. You have to do the push transaction. So you'll see I expanded it slightly just by doing the standard variables that Google's e-commerce tool allows you. So this I didn't make up, I didn't choose these ones. This is basically its standard for what you can track on an e-commerce. And as I said, if you wanted to expand on that, you can enable the advanced functions and do it that way. Alright, so basically I went from top to bottom in their library and duplicated their functions, because if you really want to follow what their GitHub README and all the instructions, the things you can do, it's a lot more than what we're using of it actually. We're using the page views, but you can also do custom event tracking and a lot more. So I didn't want to break anything that they've done or change it significantly. I just wanted to add what I needed. So I looked at their structure and simply created my own functions. And these, as I said, are the variables that are expected as standard with Google's e-commerce function. And if you read their documentation, it's pretty clear about that. And you can add additional ones if you wanted to. So I set this up under the service area. Then down here they actually have an interesting little add-on to Angularytics. It's a console log factory thing. So everything it's doing in the behind the scenes, it also is outputting it in a IE friendly way. So that part of their library, they fix that issue where console log crashes IE. So I added my events to that as well. So you'll see this transaction tracked throughout my console there. You may have seen it earlier. It wasn't not all of it was from that Google debug tool. Some of it was coming from Angularytics actually. And then these are the actual functions that come with the Google script. So if you see this, a basic HTML implementation would simply have it there. Now this is how they have gotten those same functions of the Google script into the service. So you're just pushing your information through this. So what I did is just added again the variables and duplicated everything they've done. So the way you implement it can be in your HTML directly in your HTML tags, or it can be in your controller. Okay. So once I've added these new additions to the library, I basically just had to go in and update my controller. So And it doesn't necessarily have to be a controller. I know the better way to probably do it would have been in our if you had a repeater for the thing that displays your sale to the customer at the end. You see I created a little page here. All I did was load up a small JSON file with 3 products as an object, and I'm sending this through my controller. And as I loop through them, by the way, this is supposed to be a random number because I at least wanted my Google Analytics not to all have the same sales value, so I just made a random total. But what it's doing now, as it loops through these 3 items in my order, the controller does, I did it on, as soon as my order comes back, I did the Angular for each that goes through the data that came back from wherever. And as it did it, I added up my order total, and I added some random number to the end, and then um, I tracked the e-commerce item. So this is where the Angularytics came in. And of course, as you see at the top of my controller, I had to, oh sorry, this is one controller for all pages, but as you can see there, I had to inject it there. And that way I can just simply call track e-commerce item. I'm sending it my order number, which in this case again is just a random number I created, but in our applications it would come back from the database, whatever, once the order has been submitted, it's your reference number. And then as part of my object that I just loaded, I just send that through to Angularytics, that in the end gets sent off to Google. So again, back to my Google debugger tool, I'll scroll up a bit. You'll see here is my transaction. So you'll see here how it's doing the add item, and with my variables it does it 3 times. It then registers a transaction, and then it does the track transaction call. Again, it's very important to remember this one. So as you can see here, within the information we're sending to them, here's my random order number, billing city, I just put that in. Affiliation could be the site that it's coming from or whatever, and total shipping costs. So this is all the variables that I just did in my controller. So as easy as that. Here's all the item information, my first item, second item, and third item. And as the debugger tells me, everything was successfully sent.
Now, did you actually, for those items, it's expecting like a product code and a quantity in that?
Yes, actually, it's a good point. It is expecting a certain a bunch of variables. It's got a standard set. If you don't send it anything, it doesn't freak out. It just says undefined, and you can just send it nothing. I just sent it zeros for the number values, and I made up some random things. Oh, but this is my order, so yeah. If you don't send it everything that it expects, it doesn't bomb out. It just says undefined.
There's a Google Analytics called track item that expects certain things in a certain order.
Correct. So this that was implemented here is what they expect for each item. For each item on this push for track e-commerce item, that's exactly what they expect. This is the add item, is the, I guess, the function name in their GA library, and then it expects at least these, but you don't have to send all of it through. Unless there are any questions, we spent some time looking at all the live data while we were eating, so I'm not going to go back over all of that, but you saw the live tracking is pretty cool. You can do the behavior and device types. It's really detailed about mobile versus desktop and tablet devices, and it even gives you version numbers and subversions. So the Nexus 3 isn't just a Nexus 3, it's 3 point something, and it's really detailed in the amount of information you have. And actually it helped us make big decisions in our project, even from having some of this basic analytics in our old site, is that we could tell them that Opera was less than 1% of your traffic. So we're going to build you an AngularJS app, and we're not going to do Opera support, and everybody was very happy about that. The simple template that I downloaded from Visual Studio uses a UI router, a library. Let me see here. Yeah, UI router. So that's what they chose to use. It's also available on GitHub, and yeah, here it is. Yeah, they asked us to put specific tags on specific pages. So depending on the way they set up their marketing campaigns online, some of them they would send through with a special coupon code or something in what they pass to you. So they want you to go to a specific page. That specific page they land on has to have a specific tracking script to say you've just converted at least the ad was displayed on Google to at least the visitor landing on your page. So the way we did it, we had to know what state it was in or which view you were on so that we can render the correct tracking script. And it's actually something I'm going to get into next with the custom directive. Since we didn't use Angularytics for that, we had to find our own way to figure out where the customer or the user might be and then do certain things on it.
Probably the best people to ask.
The other thing is, though, it's important maybe to mention is that this whole library that we use for Google accounts, we took the same concept and we rewired it to work with Pickwick or Peerwick Analytics. It's an open source thing that's exactly like Google Analytics. It's got the same function calls, almost named exactly the same way. And as Jim said, you know, in our app here where we initialize it, we change some of these values here, so it's basically going against the Pickwick, and the tracking worked just fine. We just found out that at the end of the day, setting up that server and everything that tracks the data, we had to host it ourselves, which has just been too much trouble for us. We thought it would be a good idea if we own the data, or at least keep it, but it was just not worth our while at the end of the day. But it was really easy to adapt this library to do that. Besides analytics, they also had a bunch of other scripts that we had to cater for. So we had to find a way how we are going to implement these existing scripts or anything that they have new, or perhaps cater for their tag manager, whether it's Google Tag Manager or anything else. And how are we going to do that without affecting our application in some weird way? From a cross-site scripting perspective, how do we keep it secure and isolate these third-party tracking scripts that we don't have any control over from interfering with our system? And we learned these lessons the hard way, because our previous application had a lot of JavaScript dependency, and they would inject things into our pages that would cause non-secure content warnings. And for an e-commerce site, and for people entering their credit cards, it says this site is unsecure, but it wasn't anything that we hosted or anything. It was those scripts they injected had a pixel that was rendered from a non-secure source. Even though the implementation said 100% HTTPS, they rendered something non-secure in there, and it looked like everybody on the site got a security warning, and it's obviously not a good thing. So we thought, how do we isolate that? One of Jim's repositories on GitHub is a AngularJS tutorial. So he created it's an application that Jim did where you can basically learn AngularJS, and it basically has a bunch of iframes on the page. So how do you render a result from something in, you guys know the fiddlers and plunkers and those kind of things, the different iframes. Jim had the idea that we should potentially use this iframe thing that he happened to write at around that time, and it was really perfect for us, because this way we can put it at the end of the application. I know they always tell you to put the scripts at the top of the page, but since it's a single page application and it does it on route change success, you basically guarantee that it's gonna trigger at least. So we thought, no problem, we'll stick it in an iframe and we'll put it in at the bottom of our page. And this is how we did it. So if you want to follow these links to Jim's AngularJS tutorial, under apps, results, and the results directive has a great example of how it's done. This was done as a directive. So we have a directive that we insert on the e-commerce conversion page, and really you can do this on all pages. Just a small little HTML tag here. It's got my tracking by BE, or whatever you want to call the directive, and we send it the order to track. It's the same object that we did, using the controller to send to Google Analytics. We're just binding to this, and in the directive, we're basically at the bottom here, we're doing a watch on that order to track. So we initialize it at the beginning as an empty object, and then we watch it for a change, and once that JSON came back, and with my order information, I then populated and changed my order data, and then kicks off into a function here that is get order data. Now, there immediately I go and use the route provider to tell me what page the user is on. If the user is on the e-commerce conversion page, we send it the scope order to track into a function that's at the top here that I'll get into now. So I created a function in this directive that's called execute client tracking script, and we send it the order information. Now, when we implemented this in our environment, we did a lot more than just the order information. We sent the location information, whatever else you wanted to track, or whatever the scripting, the media campaign that they have out there relates to. You can send it whatever you need it to, and then this is where we then, if on a normal route change success, you'll see that it says if I'm on the home page, I'm going to execute the client tracking scripts function at the top here, and this is my context. So the context is home, or context is general, or and I also watch out if it's not the e-commerce page. So I don't want to just necessarily send a general tag to the e-commerce page. Now this if statement here is basically just based on the agency tells you I want this tag to render on this page, I want these following tags to all render on all pages, and I maybe want one of them to render on the e-commerce conversion page. So you just basically set up your function at the bottom here to handle where you send what. So going back up to the execute client tracking scripts, so you'll see this is the order that we bound to, and I'm sending it context and data if it's available, and then here's the function to create the iframe. This part here is Jim's thing that really helped us along very well. So what it just basically does is create a new document, or a new element called iframe, and then it creates a new document inside the iframe. And basically, if you sent it HTML, it writes that HTML into the document, and we just made sure we set it so it's not visible in any way. Then what I do is, since we're sending it some information, I'm just setting up my variables. Here in some of our projects, it's a very long list of variables that we set up that we're ready to send. Now the secret here is that you need to take your script that you've provided, and you need to turn it into a string, a text string. And because you want to literally write this HTML, raw HTML if you want to call it that, into the iframe. And when that iframe loads, it's going to read it as HTML, and then it's going to execute the scripts inside the iframe. So it gets a bit confusing that you set up your, well, for me at least, you set up your variables and everything in here, then you need to write them not as variables into your strings, but the values, the actual values. So this, as you can see, is the Google Tag Manager, which is literally just turned into, I had to change some of the little inverted commas and things into a different thing so I can send it as one long string, and then I basically build up my generic HTML like that, and I do whatever else I need to do that's custom for this page that I wanted to write into the layer. Now with Google's Tag Manager, it's really simple the way it works. It says render the tag manager on the page and give me a data layer with all the variables that I might need in all my campaigns. So they basically said on the home page, all they need is page information. So we write the data layer again in a text format with the current page as a text value that we're sending it. So under general, again, they just needed the current page, but under the e-commerce conversion, they needed a bit more. They needed the current page, the revenue, and the order ID. On each one of these context, we write something different to the data layer, and that's really what Google's Tag Manager needs, literally, and that makes your life so much easier. I haven't been, since we launched this project in a year, I haven't had to deal with one marketing agency asking us to add anything to their site because they've got Google Tag Manager. In the production environment, they've got a lot more variables to work with, so we load up this data layer with a lot of information. Anything they might need, they can just pull from there. Here's the Google Tag Manager that we're just basically writing to the iframe, and what we did at the beginning is we told them this is what's available to you. at the final conversion page, we can give you location information, we can give you some of the customer information, we can give you, item information if you need it, and of course, um, for that project, we have a list of variables that long in this directive that we just set up, and we push it all to the data layer. And then if this data layer is in that iFrame together with Google's Tag Manager, it can read and pull out of there what it wants. So I'll show you quickly on the Google Tag Manager. It's here on my little test site on this e-commerce conversion page. You'll see here at the bottom of my content layer is the directive. Inside the directive, you'll find the iframe. Deep hidden inside here, isolated from anything that I care about, is the data layer and the Google Tag Manager script and everything they may have wanted from it. So you'll see that that long string that I created there is written out here, and it's actually interpreted as actual JavaScript, and there's the data layer reference that they have, and they can now go and read out of that data layer what they want. So this was the challenge, to convince Google's Tag Manager certification team that I actually did implement their Tag Manager, because I couldn't find it anywhere. They went into their console and they typed data layer, and I didn't see the object coming back because it was isolated. So just as a hint, when you go into your console and you try and type data layer, you see there's nothing there, and if it was there, it would have told me that. So you have to go in there and find our blank document, and inside that context they have the data layer, and the data layer now has everything they need.
Now, the other reason.
I just wanted to mention also, so this example that I showed you today is the Google Tag Manager. You can literally do this with any tracking company. I haven't come across one that this template didn't work with. They all give you a JavaScript. You take it and put it in this ugly text format. You make sure you give it the variables that it needs, and you make sure you execute the right ones at the right time, depending on the context that they wanted. So they all work just as fine in this implementation as they did straightforward into the HTML back in the day. I would do it the other way around. If I was in that situation where I didn't get data nicely from my application, I would scrub what I need and then put it in an Angular object and then do this. And then basically send that object to this directive that then goes and writes it into the iframe.